All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Tournament Podcast. I am Tom, joined as always by my brothers Marty and Mike. And today we are going to touch on a topic. We're going to drop something into a tournament here that we have not touched on yet. Really, we're not going to drop anything into a tournament. We're going to do this the reverse tournament way. And today is going to focus on the NBA and the greatest shooting guards of all time. So cue up the fire as we get started. All right, guys. So what we're going to do today, we'll do the reverse tournament. So we're going to start with zero. We've done it a couple times where we start with zero and we basically just build a Mount Rushmore. In terms of NBA shooting guards, I thought it would be a little difficult and a little limited to just have a Mount Rushmore. But keeping in true tournament format, I figured we would go with the top 8 of all time. Now, some of these are going to be difficult because of what you would consider their actual position to be, so we can discuss through it. And we're looking at an all-around skill set here for these guys because, criteria is really king on our channel. It is all about the matchups, but in this kind of reverse tournament, we don't really do matchups necessarily until it comes down to the end and we're trying to fill the last couple of spots. So right out of the gate, I think we can all agree, unless you dispute the position here, that Michael Jordan is going to make the reverse tournament for the greatest shooting guards of all time. I consider him a shooting guard, which is interesting if you look at those teams and how they were constructed, because you had a John Paxson, a B.J. Armstrong, a Steve Kerr. So you always had a traditional shooting guard, but it was like a 2 shooting guard set, because if you said then Michael was the small, then what the heck was Scotty? A power? So Michael was probably, most guys you can say, well, let's just go ahead and knock another one out here. Steph Curry's on this list, the greatest shooter that's ever stepped foot on an NBA court. Steph Curry, I guess, would be a point/shooting guard, where Michael could have been, or probably is considered, a point/shooting/small forward. And where, like a lot of times with LeBron, I say that he is really a point shooting small. He's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if he wants to be, kind of like Magic Johnson was. But anyway,
these are somewhat interchangeable then as far as the backcourt position, because I know Michael definitely was a 2 guard or shooting guard. I believe, a couple of those other guys, Steph Curry and some of them are actually quote unquote point guards, but it just depends if we're doing it interchangeable.
well, yeah, and I think we would have to, because I don't know, especially in the modern era of the game, if anybody is really a singular position anymore. I mean, like Chris Paul is a point guard. He's not a 2, but he's like an exception. Everybody kind of floats. I mean, you look at a Kevin Durant. I mean, he's tall enough to be a center. He certainly, I guess, would be more traditionally a power forward, but his skill set, like LeBron, lends him to being a 3, really even a 2, because he's such a good outside
Oh
shooter.
yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
he's not a 1, but he's those other 4 spots, or he could be. So yeah, a lot of this we're just going to have to use our best judgment. The one thing that I will say, and at the time we're recording this, I actually don't even know what the outcome of last night's game was, but my kids forced me to watch Game 5 of the 2021 NBA Finals, Milwaukee Bucks, Phoenix Suns. Oh boy, man. No offense. If you're listening to this, you're probably an NBA fan, but man alive, the brand of basketball, the NBA, whew, it's rough. It is rough. I mean, the officiating is horrendous. These guys look at each other and it's a foul. I mean, it is horrendous. And the reason I bring that up is it's really hard to judge the guys nowadays and add them into this list because they've got it so easy. Doesn't mean that I don't think they're as skilled as they've ever been. but they can't be touched. And
Oh
then
yeah.
you look at the old days when somebody like an Oscar, who, I mean, it certainly was more physical back then, but really, like the Oscar generation versus the guys nowadays, the athleticism and that is so much greater. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
leaps and bounds. So if you're comparing guys together, it makes it difficult to get the old school guys. Like you've got that sweet spot, which again, and I know it sounds biased because of our ages, like from the through the 80s and the 90s is the sweet spot when basketball was basketball. Um, so
I
anyway, with
agree.
that being said, you know, so I we'll discuss the positions if it comes down to, well, do we truly think they're a shooting guard or could be considered one? But right out of the gate with the first two, I mean, I would assume you would both agree that Michael and Steph Curry are making the list as two of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like I said, I think technically, like you were saying, Steph is one of those guys I believe is listed as a point guard, but to me, yeah, definitely plays much more like a shooting guard. When he's averaging what 30 points, over 30 points a game.
Yeah,
But
when
yeah,
his
so I
primary
would,
skill is shooting, and he is
yeah,
clearly the greatest 3 point shooter in the history of the game. And if just because I don't appreciate today's brand of basketball doesn't mean I don't appreciate his skill set, and clearly can unbiasedly, if that's a word, say he's heads and above the greatest shooter of all time.
yeah,
And the
he is
ironic thing
phenomenal.
is that arguably the second greatest is on the same damn team with him. Then you could
Oh
say it's Clay. So,
yep.
Yeah, he's fantastic as well.
all right.
Uh,
Well, with that being said, Marty, I know you're a little bit more old school NBA than Mike, just because of age. So, with Michael and Steph, and we have 6 spots remaining, who would be somebody you would think of next?
Well, um, as far as two guards, for me, one of the first people just that pop into my mind is going to be Reggie Miller. Um,
nice.
Reggie Miller could score and will. We know that one time he scored, I think was it 8 points and
3 seconds or
something
something?
ridiculous like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, he could take a game over. It will. To me, talk about one of the greatest shooters of all time. Reggie's at least in that conversation.
And I think you go with the mentality means something too. You know, the Mamba mentality, as they some people say. Basically, just that burning desire to win and compete. Michael had it. Kobe had it. Certainly, Reggie is one of those guys. Larry, where they just at all costs they wanted to win. Um, so I don't know how if we're if it was the Mount Rushmore like we've typically done of the Final Four. I mean, maybe Reggie wouldn't make the cut. I'm not saying he wouldn't. I'm just saying we'd discuss it. But certainly in a Final Eight, I mean, Reggie Miller has to be on that list. Mike, do you agree or disagree?
oh yeah, oh definitely, yeah. I would agree.
So with now MJ, Steph Curry, and Reggie Miller, I just mentioned somebody else
Yeah.
who some people say is the greatest ball player of all time. I disagree. I am a fence person between Michael and LeBron. I was clearly LeBron for many years, and now as time has gone on, and I'm just looking at the full career, I'm starting to slowly tilt towards Michael again. Um, but with that being said, a lot of people say, well, it's not Michael or LeBron, it's Kobe. And really, between those three, I don't know how anybody would say it's potentially anybody else is the GOAT. I mean, well, anybody can say anything, but realistically, I mean, maybe Magic, but other than that, I just don't see how you would say it's anybody else. So, I'm rambling on, basically asking you guys, do you think Kobe should be on the list?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, we. I don't need to ask him. even with if we did the Mount Rushmore that we typically do, Kobe would make the list.
Yeah,
Let's
of
take a look
course.
here.
That actually,
Yeah,
the
25
two
points,
the two
5
people that
rebounds. Yeah, he
came
was a
to
25 and 5 guy for his whole career, and I think he's the quite possibly the greatest defensive player of all time. I think he has the record for the most Defensive Player of the Year awards. I'd have to look that up. But anyway, I'm sorry, Mike, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, Kobe, I definitely agree. Because after Michael and Steph, the first two people that actually popped into my head immediately were Reggie Miller and Kobe. So yeah, that's especially Kobe. I think Kobe's kind of third there behind Michael and Steph, and then Reggie's gonna be not too far behind. So yeah, I don't think you can argue with Kobe being in there.
So we are off to a nice start here. We already have half of our great eight sorted out. Um, so now is where it's going to really start getting interesting, I think. Really, the Reggie Miller pick was the first interesting one because MJ, Steph Curry, and Kobe, and unless you consider Steph Curry a point guard, are clearly on the list. I mean, there's no dispute. They would be on the Mount Rushmore. So then it would be who's the fourth guy on the Mount Rushmore. We haven't necessarily said it's Reggie, just right now he is, but he could get bumped out. And what I would like to do is when we're done, we have our compiled Elite Eight, so to speak. I think it'd be cool to maybe rank them. Not go
Okay.
through our tournament to crown a winner, because we'd probably all agree it was Michael Jordan, but just to rank them 1 to 8 at that point. So we'll worry about that here shortly. We've got 4 more guys to go through here and choose. Marty, you came up with Reggie, and then I threw in Kobe. So, Mike, what are your initial thoughts here on number 5?
All right, I'm gonna go more old school, even than Reggie Miller. I'm going back to the 60s and 70s, I believe here. How about somebody like Jerry West? Because I believe Jerry was. I'm actually doing a little research as well as we're discussing this, and it looks like Jerry was kind of like the modern day guys, where I guess he was a point and a shooting guard. I'm not sure which one he played predominantly, but I mean Jerry West, 27 points a game, just under 6 rebounds, under 7 assists a game for his career. I mean, he pretty much did it all. 5-time All Defensive Player. Obviously was an NBA champ, an MVP, multi-time All-Star. I mean, Jerry West is, one of those guys I think that's maybe been forgotten about a little bit over the years.
Yeah, I would think just
but
generally as time goes by, I mean, and kids nowadays may think of him more of an executive, which
oh
how
yeah,
interesting that he turned into such a phenomenal executive.
yeah,
Pretty much matching what he did on the court. And I know it's not been proven, but it's pretty much known he is the logo of the
Oh yeah.
NBA.
yeah, oh yeah.
But yeah,
That's
Jerry
worth
West,
something.
he loved Kobe because they had that same mentality again. Jerry West was a killer. Man, I've seen Jerry West interviews where, I mean, he couldn't sleep after a lot. I think he, and I could be, well, you know what, I'm not going to go down that road, but he would get very upset when they didn't win. Or, a single game, obviously, not to mention, like a series or, winning in the finals. I mean, yeah, took it very, very hard. Super competitive, skill set to match. I think he's the only guy ever, and again, we always clarify these things, but I think he's the only guy ever to win the finals MVP on the losing team. I believe I heard that. So somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe that is accurate. But
Let's
absolutely
see.
no dispute on Jerry West.
No.
None whatsoever. Man, we're rolling through these quick. All right, Marty, I'll go back to you. Who would be your next thought as a potential candidate to make our Elite Eight of shooting guards?
Sorry, I was just going to jump in here
Oh
real
no.
quick because
I
I did
apologize,
look and
everybody.
verify. The 1969 NBA Finals, the Celtics beat the Lakers, so the Celtics did win it, but Jerry West was the Finals MVP with averaged almost 38 points a game in the series, so
Wow.
well deserved, I guess.
Yeah, I
There we
mean, just
go,
a
bringing
heck of a.
stats and
That's what we do.
tidbits to the forefront of our podcast.
And I'm looking at in a list here, career stats, and I don't know if this includes finals or if it's just regular season, but number one on the list in terms of shooting guards points per game is Michael. Number two, believe it or not, is Jerry West. So a
Nice.
scoring machine to go along with everything else that he brought. Yeah, I mean, there's not even. Yeah, man, what a significant drop off. Anyway, I'm sorry, Marty. Go ahead, unless Mike has something else that he wants to throw in.
Oh boy. Well, you know what? I'll see you later. I'm out of here.
All right.
I'm back.
You know me, I am definitely more of the old school, even though, Mike went very old school with Jerry West. That was a great addition. Um, Boy, I guess to me, yeah, the '80s were just the golden age of the NBA, in my opinion. I kind of think of Clyde Drexler, even though I don't believe Clyde ever won any gold, primarily because of Michael Jordan being in the league at that time. But Clyde Drexler
Was he on
again
those
was
Rockets teams that won?
oh yeah, I mean
I mean,
That's
I'm
true.
not sure that he was, but we can easily look that up. But anyway, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I mean Clyde. The majority of his career obviously was with Portland, and
Yeah.
Portland was a very very good team. Had it not been for possibly even in the West, the Lakers, but certainly going in the finals against Michael. If it wasn't for Michael, I'm sure he would have won some NBA titles. But that's who jumps to mind to me is Clyde. He was a tremendous scorer, athletic, good defender.
Yeah, and I have to say that, and I've always, my oldest son was a big basketball fan, and we like to revisit history. I said culture. My sons, not forget about '80s music, '80s sports, etc. But um, I've always said that if there was no Michael, I think Clyde would have been the man in the day. I mean, he was that good. Now, he didn't play in the best market necessarily, but I think Clyde Drexler was the number two guy. I mean, he was sensational. I think to make this list, we're looking for savages. We're looking for guys with an all-around skill set. And I say that to quickly throw in this, that like a Ray Allen, who people think is one of the greatest shooters of all time, and I say people think, he is. I just don't know about the all-around skill set of Ray. To me, he seemed more of a stretch the defense. I'm going to sit in the corner.
Yeah.
I'm going to catch and shoot, rather than a complete package, being able to score, one on one. And I know he could, but I'm just saying in the scheme of things, like compared to a Michael or a Kobe, you've got to have the elite of the elite, an all-around player here. So to me, I don't know if I'm going to put Ray on this list. We can discuss. But going back to Clyde, he's the opposite. He could do absolutely everything. Was athletic to beat the band. I mean, he really was a Michael clone in many ways. Um, he just wasn't the scorer in terms of points per game. I'm sure he didn't take as many shots as Michael. But I think if he wanted to average 30, he could have averaged 30 a game. So I'm definitely down with Clyde on the list. Mike, what do you think?
Oh, I would agree. Clyde was an animal, and to clarify, yep, Clyde did win an NBA title in '95 with the Houston Rockets. So even though he got there twice with Portland, and yeah, lost. Well, actually, one of them was Michael and then the first one, the Pistons, I believe, beat him.
Well,
But
that's
but yep,
interesting that he wasn't on both of those Rockets teams. Huh.
yep. So 95, he won it. So,
Okay.
and I noticed it says he was only once named to the All NBA first team, which is kind of a crime that the career he had, and he was only a first teamer once.
I mean,
Idiots.
I guess it was Michael. You know what I mean? If they're going by positions, I assume when they mean
Yeah.
first team, they're picking the best
Yeah,
five. If every year he was matched up for the two spot, it had to be him or Michael. You know,
I'm not sure how.
Michael ruined a lot of careers and a lot of history.
That's because the one season he did make it. It says it was '92 when Michael was still in the league, so maybe they made an exception. Poor Clyde had to be on at least once. Because yeah, I agree. Clyde, like you said, if not for Michael, Clyde may have been the best player of his era. Yeah,
Yeah,
Clyde was amazing.
And I
absolutely was.
apologize for the statistical error. I'm embarrassed that I forgot that Clyde won one during
Yeah.
his run with the Rockets. I'm thinking of Portland.
And
And
the
he's
good thing is about the tournament podcast, I mean, we are very open minded. We do our best to research on the fly. We do all this really by memory. I've mentioned this on previous podcasts. We really don't research ahead of time. And, well, heck, literally, Mike and Marty had no idea what today's topic was going to be until I hit record and we started the show. So that's how we try to keep it. But I do apologize for Marty. That was unacceptable. So let's move on. If we can, this might have ruined the entire show. Um, so Marty with Clyde. I'm going to go back to Mike. Anybody that jumps out and once we get this 8, I'm kind of writing the guys down. We might, say, oh my gosh, but, and we'll throw somebody else in there and we'll sort them out. But anybody else right now to take the 7 spot?
again, going old school again. How about somebody like Pistol Pete Maravich? Pete Maravich
Yeah,
averaged what,
that's
the mid 20s, I think, like 20 game, could pull down boards. He averaged what, it looks like 5.5 assists a game. So he had he filled the stat sheet up for his career.
yeah,
Um,
that's a tough one, and the only reason it's tough is not skill by any stretch of the imagination. I said to start this, we'd have to really discuss, like the Steph Curry discussion. Is he really just a point, or is he a point shooting? I think of Pistol as just solely a point.
Yeah.
And that'd be the only reason you'd leave him off a list like this. So, Marty, what do you think about that?
No, I mean I kind of agree too. I mean with Pistol Pete, my God, he's phenomenal. I mean I think of him as a point guard just because of his mastery with the ball, his creativity, and his passing. I mean I don't know if he was specifically known as a point guard. Yeah, that's up for discussion, but
it has him listed as a shooting guard, but I mean, I actually do agree with you guys that, yeah, he's known, and obviously he was known for his scoring, especially in college. But I think, aside from that, people know him more so for like I said, the mastery with the ball and passing and all that. So, yeah, I kind
Yeah.
of think of him more as a point guard as well, even though it has him listed as a 2. So, I mean, if we want to leave him off here for that reason, I'm not going to argue with it. So,
Well, and the
but
thing is, I don't want to penalize somebody for an all around skill set. As we said, that was part of the criteria. Just because he was maybe the greatest ball handler slash passer along with, Magic in the history of the game doesn't mean that he can't be a 2. Um,
oh
let's
yeah, 'cause
see.
he scored buckets. That's for sure.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
look at
looking at
the
basketballreference.com, like Mike said, he is listed as a shooting guard.
that's actually what I'm on as well
Oh,
currently.
I
what
mean,
about? Let me try to find
look
an
at the
actual
numbers he put
NBA.
up.
I mean, he averaged over 24 points a game, over 4 rebounds, 5 assists.
Yeah.
So he apparently he did it all.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's it's hard to argue him, you know, being on this list. Again, the only thing some of these players is like I think Tommy said it earlier. When time goes by, some of these guys start to get a little bit, forgotten in the conversation. With Pete Maravich, I mean, he's not even, in 80s really. I know he played right at the end. He had one season with Larry Bird, which can you imagine if he was healthy, Pistol Pete, if Bird, would have been, in the league a few years, and they may have even had. Well, they didn't have Bill Walton at that time. Just
Yeah,
think of the
I was gonna mention
possibilities.
that. Boy, if they were all in their primes, woo,
Yeah,
they were already good
80,
enough. But yeah,
82-0.
Yeah,
well,
unfortunately, there's a lot of kids nowadays that, because what, Pistol Pete's last game was in 1980, so what, 41 years ago? It's just sad thinking there's a lot of kids nowadays that probably don't even know who Pistol Pete was or is.
yeah, and that's the great thing about YouTube. I mean, so if you're listening to this, you're like, I would think if you clicked on an NBA themed podcast or YouTube video, you've heard the name Pistol Pete Maravich. But if you're unaware of what he brought to the game, he was really what would you call like a trendsetter? I mean, he was a
Oh
unique
yeah,
skill at that point. Well, I don't even know if there's anybody like him now. I mean, like I said, Magic was the next closest I can think of. So
yeah. I mean,
now, I'm gonna just going by what is on Basketball Reference. I was trying to find the actual the NBA.com and find like his career stats to see how they have him listed. Because if NBA.com has him as a shooting guard, then he's a shooting guard. And I'm just going through pages and
everything that I've
pages.
seen here, it does have him listed as a two guard. It's just he was so talented with the ball and such a playmaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
You know
he's a
what? Yeah, Pistol Pete's on the list. I mean, who are we kidding? He's got to be on there.
five-time All
Nice.
Star. Yeah, I mean,
He's
just
still, I mean, I think he's still,
sakes.
or at least up until recently, held like, I mean, I know we're not talking college here, but he had a lot of the college records still.
Boy,
Um,
he could score.
yeah, for scoring, total points per game. And he did it, in a good conference in the SEC and with LSU, where like a lot of these players now, you get these little conference guys that just tear it up and they stuff the stat sheet. But and again, it's apples and oranges. And we're talking he was in college in the '60s versus today's game. But anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Pistol Pete
Well,
Maravich is on the list. We need a number 8, at least for the time being. Um,
and can I just throw in one last quick thing now
Here we go.
on Pistol Pete though? Again, when you're talking about he was in college in the '60s and stuff, he's lucky that he lived as long as he did. I mean, with his ball handling and his mastery like that, I'm surprised he didn't get burned for being a witch. I mean, guys didn't move and handle the ball like that, even nowadays. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a freaking tribute that Pistol Pete wasn't burned at the stake.
And unfortunately, he did pass very early. I think in his early 40s.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yeah, what a legacy, what a player. But I'm glad you brought that up. I would have initially not considered him because I would have thought point guard all the way. But again, you're not going to get penalized in this list for having an all-around game. That's what we want you to have. And certainly, I mean, he could even be considered for a Final Four Mount Rushmore spot. That's how good he was. So, all right, Pistol Pete is on the list. Number 8, Marty, any thoughts on who should be the
Um,
final entry? And we will continue on. This won't be the end all be all here, but I have one. I'll jump in when you're done. But
well, there are a couple guys. Again, I do lean more towards the old school. Now, this guy that I'm thinking of right now, I'm not really a fan of his, and I guess it's not fair to say because he was a little bit edgier and had an attitude, and that shouldn't take away at all because he's one of the greatest of all time. But Allen Iverson, I mean, a lot of people think of some of the off-court things, like him not wanting to practice, or
Yeah.
what other
Well, bottom
kind of
line was he was
things.
so damn good he didn't need to practice. I think that's where
Well,
the problem started. But please
he
continue.
literally was. I mean, look at his stats. I mean,
He was fantastic.
he almost averaged 27 a game, 6 assists a game. I mean, he was a heck of defender, 8-time, all defensive team. To me, Allen Iverson, I'm not a huge fan of him, um, but he was tremendous. And for his size, was he 6 foot, or I don't think if he was taller
I
than
think he
six
is
foot,
listed at 6 foot. So
Yep, he's listed at 6 foot even.
I mean, that's phenomenal what he could do in the league at that size. Imagine if he would have been 6'4",
now
six
that
five.
I appreciate you bringing him up, by the way, because again, I would have initially thought point, but I think he is classified as a 1-2
Yeah,
hybrid. And as long as there's a part of the two in your game or that you're known for, you need to be on the list. And yeah, I mean, I don't even know if there's any discussion. Of course, Allen Iverson. And again, I guess we'll use Basketball Reference as our end all be all because they do a nice job of breaking things down. And on basketballreference.com, he is listed as a shooting guard and point guard. So,
yep.
wow. Okay. Mike, was there anything you wanted to throw in? I don't want to cut you off. I just don't know how we can not have him on the list.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, there ain't really a whole lot you can say. I don't think you can argue that. Yeah, AI is. I mean, you could argue the 1 versus 2, which I'm not going to. I'm just saying that's the only argument I think some people could make potentially, as far as him being on this list. But yeah, he's more than deserving, and again, he's another guy that could possibly make the top 4.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was that good, and especially like Marty said, considering he was, just 6 feet tall. I mean, it's that much more impressive. So yeah,
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. So on paper we have 8. Let's start throwing in some guys that we think could also have a good chance to make the Elite 8, and then we'll start sorting and see if we can come up with a definitive 8, at least in our eyes. I was going to jump in here and throw in Dwayne Wade.
Yeah.
I think this might sound even weird to say, but I think maybe in some aspects underrated. Obviously, I'm a UC Bear. Obviously, I live in Cincinnati. I'm a UC Bearcats fan. I went to college at
Oh,
UC, at least for a point.
okay.
And they played Marquette, obviously, all the time with Dwayne Wade. So I got to see him in college all the time. Come the NBA draft, I knew this guy had to be the first pick in the draft, clearly. He wasn't. And actually, I think, was he not even 2? I think that was the Carmelo Anthony,
Ugh.
Darko Milicic, or whatever you called him,
Ugh.
debacle. And then
Ugh.
Dwayne Wade might have been next. Actually, let me look that up. But while I'm looking this up, I mean, Dwayne Wade, all around skill set. I mean, just, I don't know what else you can say. I mean, what a leader.
Oh yeah.
1-1 with a run. Well, I don't want to say rundown, but literally a Shaq that had seen better days at that point. And then, of course, they say the big 3 when he won it with LeBron. And again, we're all entitled to our opinion. And this is my opinion. I don't think that was a big 3. No offense to Chris Bosh, I just don't think he
Yeah.
was a Dwayne Wade, LeBron James caliber guy.
I agree.
So it was just 2, really trend-setting players with a very, very good Chris Bosh, and then nobody else. You might as well have had me on that team. Me, Marty, and Mike. And they won a couple championships, and I think they made it to the championship every year they were together.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just think Dwayne Wade needs to have serious consideration. He was just fantastic.
Yeah, he was. He definitely was, and I mean, Dwayne Wade's not humongous, but he might be what, like 6'4", something like that. I sometimes look at the height of the players too as like it's by no means not a measuring stick, but just sometimes that even makes them even more impressive to me in
Yeah,
a
I mean, like you said with
dominant league
Allen,
of
I mean, because
size.
Steph, I think, is 6'3", which is impressive. But I mean, Allen
Yep,
Iverson at 6 foot. I mean, are you
yep.
kidding me? And I was wrong. I was way off. Let me clarify this. So the 2003 NBA draft, number one pick LeBron James. I don't know how I forgot that. That's embarrassing. But
Yeah,
I
it
was
is.
right on number two, Darko Milicic. Come on, Detroit.
That was Detroit, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
come on. I mean, number three, Carmelo. I can see. Number four, Chris Bosh. That was probably a stretch. But number five was Dwayne Wade. But yeah, it's funny when you look back at some of these drafts. I mean, it is hilarious.
Yep.
The players that these teams. I mean, Darko. Okay, well, I'm going to go into the weeds here. Enough of that. But yeah, Dwayne Wade, the fifth pick in the 2003 draft, should have been number one, in my opinion, even with LeBron, only because we could see what Dwayne was doing against more grown men versus LeBron dominating kids.
Yep.
And LeBron was like a grown man dominating kids. He was so big. But was I wrong? I mean, in hindsight, it should have been LeBron one and obviously Dwayne Wade two to the Detroit Pistons. But anyway, yeah. So I would say if you guys agree, Dwayne Wade at least deserves consideration.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. I think Mike. It might be anybody you think that should at least be considered for our Elite
Oh,
Eight here.
oh, there is.
Uh-oh.
And again, you notice a trend with all my selections, or guys that I throw out there. Another old school guy, verified on Basketball Reference that he is a two guard slash a three. The Iceman, George Gervin.
Nice.
Oh.
Career
Nice.
stats of 25 a game, over 5 rebounds. The assists were a little under 3, but I mean, again, he did it all. He was a multi-time scoring champ. I believe he was never the MVP, but yeah, multi-time All-Star, multi-time All-NBA / All-ABA player. Another one of those guys that did it all and had arguably the greatest finger roll in NBA history.
Oh, not
I don't even know.
arguably.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't even know if it's arguable, but
Nope. Nope.
Well, and look at his nickname. I mean, that just goes to show you something too. When you are crowned the Iceman, I mean that's reserved for Hall of Fame MMA fighters and hitmen.
that's
So,
and again, that's another one of those guys that I think is been forgotten about over time, and like I said, anybody that maybe isn't as familiar with the old school NBA, just like you said with Pete Maravich, should go and seek out some footage of George Gervin, because yeah, he was fun to watch. He was fantastic.
now let's just throw out, and Marty, I'll let you jump in, but I'm looking at a site here called lineups.com, and they have their rankings of the top 50 shooting guards of all time. And I'm just going to run through like maybe the top 15, and I'll throw one more in. But just their rankings are Michael, Kobe, Jerry, Dwayne, James Harden, who I can't bring up in this list. No offense to the younger audience. Again, I just think today's NBA, I mean, James is a phenomenal player, but I don't know. Moving on. Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, Clyde, Pistol, Iceman, and that's your top 10. Then we go into Manu Ginobili, who I really wouldn't consider. Clay, who could be considered because, again, shooting wise, and it's shooting guards, Clay is on another level. Earl the Pearl is 13. Definitely would deserve consideration. DeMar DeRozan is 14, and Mitch Richmond. That's kind of why I was reading through these. For two. Mitch Richmond is 15. 16 is Jimmy Butler, who I'm not he wouldn't get consideration from me. However, 17 would, and especially Marty, I think, is going to appreciate
Yes.
this. Joe Dumars.
Oh wow.
So I read through that whole thing pretty much to get to Mitch Richmond and Joe Dumars. I don't know if they could squeeze in our top 8, but I at least wanted to mention their names during this because, man, they were, again, 80s basketball. They were 80s and 90s. I don't know when their careers spanned exactly, but just fantastic players.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you brought that up because I was a huge Mitch Richmond and Sacramento Kings fan. As funny as it sounds, but I found out that Tom is also from Cincinnati. I am too. Um, so,
Wait a minute.
yep.
Mike, where are you from?
Coincidentally, I'm from Cincinnati as
Jesus!
well.
We learned
Yes.
something new today, ladies and gentlemen. Even though we are brothers. Go ahead.
Anyone that has decent knowledge of the NBA may know that Cincinnati's had a professional basketball team, the Cincinnati Royals, who eventually they moved when it went to Sacramento to be the Sacramento Kings. So when I learned that when I was real young in the 80s, I liked Sacramento. At one point, I actually found a Sacramento Kings hat. I had a Sacramento Kings sweatshirt, which were hard to find in Cincinnati, but I loved Mitch Richmond. And he was a flat out scorer. Yeah, I mean, he was
Yeah.
one of those guys that maybe didn't fill the stat sheet like some of these other guys, but Mitch could flat out score.
And I mean, just bring in, and if one or two people stumble across this podcast at some point and just take our advice, click on, look up Mitch Richmond on YouTube. We're going outside the scope of this podcast, but another one just in terms of scoring, who I think gets forgotten by the non-diehards, and I'm not really a diehard, but or the people of our generation is Bernard King. Look these guys up. You will be amazed. Quick caveat as well. Marty mentioned the Cincinnati Royals. Oscar Robertson not only would be on this list, I would argue that he could be number 1, but, and he was going to be brought up, Basketball Reference has him listed as a solid point guard only. So again, using that criteria, Oscar cannot make the list, but living in Cincinnati, growing up in Cincinnati, still residing in Cincinnati, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up quite possibly the greatest basketball player in the history of the game, Oscar.
Yep. Agreed, 1,000,000%. Yeah, again, any young listeners out there that just want to learn a little more about the game, look some of these people up. Oscar Robertson, regarded as one of the greatest players of all time, period. Through high school, even I think Crispus Attucks, college, Cincinnati, just tremendous.
Let me we love throwing little bits of trivia in here. And again, I throw this in, and I have to then stop myself and say I could be wrong. But I believe the greatest basketball movie of all time, which we all agree on, is Hoosiers. The final game that the Indiana team played, I believe, was against Oscar Robertson's team in real life. Was it Crispus Attucks?
I think so.
So I think in the movie and in real life, that was the final game was against Oscar Robertson. So even though it was a high school Oscar, it makes it even more impressive. All right. Let me jump to this real quick, gentlemen. Since I said we're going to use basketballreference.com as our end-all be-all, because it does help in discussions, you've got to have some uniform criteria. I have a shocker. Stephen Curry is listed as a point guard only, which is going to remove him from this discussion. So he is getting crossed off the list.
Yeah, get him out of here.
So, with that being said, that drops us down now to 9 candidates. Is there anybody else either one of you wanted to jump in with that would deserve consideration before we start trying to rank these guys?
I myself, I'm actually referencing that lineups that lineups.com article that you
Yeah.
mentioned before, and yeah, I mean, going down the list, I mean, obviously all these, or at least a lot of these guys are stellar, but yeah, anybody that deserves to potentially, or that deserves to make the top 8. Yeah, I mean, there's nobody that really jumps out at me. The only other guy on here that jumps out at me as even a possibility is somebody like Earl the Pearl Monroe, but I still,
Yeah.
18 a game. I mean, he again was a star, had a great career, but yeah, being a top, 8 of all time, maybe not. So I think I'm good with what we have.
All right. Yeah, I mean I mean you could go on and on. We could have done a 16. We could have. I didn't want to do a traditional 16 or well, pretty much we always start with 16 and whittle our way down to a champion. Only because I thought it was going to be Michael, so it would be kind of useless to do that. So that's why I decided to do the reverse tournament. But Marty, if you're okay, we can start trying to rank the 9 that we have, and then if we have any thoughts at the end of squeezing somebody else in to maybe the 8th spot or something, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If it were any larger of a pool, there are definitely a few guys that, when we're talking about shooting guard, which is kind of primarily a scorer, you got some guys you could, throw in there and say, well, Tracy McGrady was a heck of a scorer, guys
Oh
like
yeah,
that, or even a little more of an old school like David Thompson.
yeah,
He was a heck of a scorer.
yeah. That's actually another good one. If there's anything we can do with this, get 1 or 2 people to maybe check out somebody they normally would not have. That's another YouTube. Pull up David Thompson highlights, and you will be
Oh yeah,
blown away.
athletic to beat the band. But nope, I agree. As far as the top 8, I think we have it narrowed down pretty darn well.
Okay, well then let's jump right in and let's just kind of now that Steph's out, I think it makes it a little bit easier. And I will double check basketballreference.com to make sure we do have all players listed as shooting guards. But in terms of 1, 2, are we safe saying it's Michael Kobe 1, 2 just to start? Or would you think maybe
Yes.
AI should be considered?
I myself am good with Kobe and Mike, or Michael and Kobe rather, being 1 and 2 respectively. AI is close, but yeah, Michael and Kobe are kind of on a different level in my opinion. So
Okay, I mean, and that's how I feel, Marty, or
Oh,
you.
absolutely agree, 100%.
So, with that being said, we've got Reggie Miller, Jerry West, Clyde Drexler, Pistol Pete, and Allen. I mean, we do have Wade and Gervin too, but we'll just stick with our initial grouping. So, number 3, would you lean towards Reggie, Jerry, Clyde, Pistol, or AI?
Mm,
whew,
that's a toughie.
I think I know which way I would lean, but I'll kind of see what you guys say
Yeah,
first,
and
or Marty.
I've kind of already in my head got who I think would be 3, 4. I don't want to say it yet, so
Well,
unless you want me
to
to.
to me, it's not the sexiest pick, but if you're looking at statistics, I would say you have to go with Jerry West.
Ah,
I
that's
mean,
that's who I was thinking. Jerry is number 3, so
yeah, I mean,
And that's
look
where
at
I was at too. Exactly.
look at the numbers that Jerry put up. I mean, about 27 points, almost 6 boards, 6 assists. That's elite. Those are
and
elite numbers.
not that there's not anybody on this list that we wouldn't love to get on our small little growing podcast, or we hope growing podcast. But what a gentleman and a class act Jerry West is as well. Man, you talk about a dream podcast. Well, obviously, we'd love to have Michael. We'd take
Yes.
anybody on this podcast. Let's be honest here. If you were a
Maybe
water
not
boy for an
Dwayne
NBA team, we'd
Shensis.
love to have you. But Jerry West, if Jerry stumbles across this, and he's listening to this, we'd love to get you on the show.
Yep.
Just reach out via email. We will work around your schedule, sir.
Thank you, Mr. West.
Yep, we appreciate you.
If you've ever attended an NBA game, we might take you on this podcast. So
I would also ask Jerry West to
the Menendez brothers could be on there. Yeah.
to like the video if you would, Mr. West. Subscribe to the channel. Anybody else out there listening as well, please take a moment. We are in need of any support that we can get to keep this going. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment where you think we were wrong, where you think we're right. If we're crazy, that's all right. We'll take constructive criticism as well. So we are in agreement. Michael Jordan is the greatest shooting guard of all time, followed by Kobe, then Mr. Jerry West. 4 gets a little more difficult. I'll just jump in and say my initial reaction there was going to be AI. But what do you guys think?
That's kind of where I was leaning to. Just looking at the scoring numbers specifically, it kind of came to AI and Pistol Pete. But just because AI had the longevity, he did it over a longer period of time. Because I think Maravich only played for I don't know if it was 9 or 10 seasons.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was 10, or at least a partial 10th. But
so just because of the shorter career, I was leaning more toward AI at number 4.
No argument from me. I mean, his numbers speak for themselves, and then you throw on top his defensive. I mean, he's an 8-time All-Defensive Team. I mean, to me, again, elite numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers don't lie.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're looking for all-around players here. So he certainly fit the bill. Practice out of the equation. Allen Iverson was just... So that would be, if we would stop there, that's our Mount Rushmore. We're saying the greatest shooting guards ever are Michael, Kobe, and again, with criteria of Basketball Reference telling us that they were listed as a point guard. Michael, Kobe, Jerry West, and Allen Iverson. I think that's hard to dispute. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. You could dispute it, but I'm just saying that's a tough 4 to beat right there.
Yep.
All right, so our Mount Rushmore is set. We need to go ahead and fill in ranking spots 5, 6, 7, and 8. Boy, I keep saying this is where it gets tough. It's really tough here. What are your guys' thoughts on 5? Oh man, we're at a standstill here.
I'm just kind of looking at the rest of the guys here. Wow.
I mean, do we take rings into consideration? If we're taking rings, I think Dwayne Wade has 3, I believe. He would be the next guy on the list, at least championship-wise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Pistol Pete, but at the same time, my eyes keep taking me back to George Gervin.
Oh yeah, they should.
George Gervin, 25 a game, over 5 rebounds. I mean, and he did that over what he play 14, 15 years. I mean, man.
Yeah, 12-time All-Star. Because he was Hall of Famer, 4-time scoring champion. I mean, yeah. Whew.
Yeah, it kind of came down to George and Pistol Pete at this point for me, but I think I myself, again, Pistol Pete had the stats as well, but just because George sustained it over a longer period of time, because you figure the end of his career, he was putting up 26, 25, 21. Even the last season of his career, he put up over 16 a game, which still ain't shabby, obviously. I think I'm leaning more to throwing George Gervin into the number 5 spot here.
Well, it's one of those things where it's so hard to argue with it. I really couldn't make a case against it. But Marty, what do you think?
No, I mean, I agree too. He put up numbers. Again, numbers don't lie. Yeah, he's probably the next most prolific scorer at that position, arguably and statistically. Yeah, I can't argue having the Iceman up there. He was, and for any of the current fans, George Gervin was Kevin Durant before Kevin Durant. Put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I do appreciate that in our top five, we've got, the 80s, the 90s. I'm trying to think when Kobe retired.
He
In
retired
Early
like what?
2000s?
2000s, he was.
No, he went into the
obvious.
Hall of Fame. Was it last year?
Oh my
He
God,
went
the
in.
early 2000s. Boy, am I
So
way
yeah,
off. Kobe
so like
retired in 2016. So I apologize for that. I was way, way off. But
Yeah,
I
you
don't
were.
watch the NBA anymore. I mean, pretty much when Michael retired and it just didn't become fun anymore, I haven't really watched. But anyway, what I was getting at is having, the 60s with Jerry West into the 70s, George Gervin from primarily the 70s. We've got 80s, 90s, 2000s, really up to 2016 here. So it's a nice list. We're not forgetting about the older players, is really why I was rambling on. So with George as number five, number six, Clyde Drexler, Pistol Pete Maravich, Reggie Miller, Dwayne Wade. I'm again gonna throw in Dwayne. Would be my initial reaction for six. Um, I just Pistol though is, well, boy, as much as I love Reggie and Clyde, and I said Clyde could have been the best player in the NBA if it wasn't for Michael. It's like, well, why isn't he already in the top five? But looking at Dwayne and Pistol, golly, man, it's hard not to make one of them
Um,
six.
let me just say this, and you decide if leaving this in the conversation or if you want to edit all this out. I really like Dwayne Wade. He seems like a great guy, and he's a great TV host. If anybody's ever watched the show The Cube, he's a tremendous host and personality. The only slight bias I have against Dwayne Wade, I am not a fan of the quote unquote more current generation of NBA guys that would talk on the phone and text, hey, let's play together when our contracts are up and have a super team, quote unquote.
And I
And
agree
that's what
with
I,
you, but as I mentioned earlier too, I just don't consider that a super team. I mean,
but
uh,
just him and LeBron alone, forget Bosch,
well,
just
you
him
could
and
say
LeBron.
Michael and Scotty. I know they were drafted. That wasn't colluding on
Exactly.
the phone, but they had a lot more
Exactly.
support than Dwayne and LeBron had on the Heat. That's for damn
They
sure.
did. Oh, absolutely for the overall team. But my personal bias, though, is
Yeah.
just these guys that in the current generation. Yeah, I know people are drafted in some tremendous teams, but even even a little more older school like the Rockets when Barkley and Pippen and then they met Olajuwon there, even though they wound up not being good. It's just that's my only personal prejudice. I just wanted to admit that right off the top. Dwayne Wade's tremendous, but you know I couldn't put him, for me personally, I couldn't put him above like AI or, mm,
All right. Well, let me do that. Well, first thing here, Mike, if you could bump your mic back just a bit.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's
is
all
There
there
we
right.
go.
breathing?
I hear heavy breathing and the fans are getting upset. Um, so that's fine with Dwayne. And we're all trying to be in agreement here. So for number six, let's say then it's between Reggie, Clyde, and Pistol. And I said I appreciate in our top five that we have two old school guys. In our top six, would it be fair to break down three newer school and three older school guys and make number six Pistol Pete? Because
That's.
I mean, whew,
I
look at
mean,
the
looking
stat
at
sheet as you said. I mean, he's incredible.
Mm,
the stats for the remaining four guys here. Um, that's where I'm kind of leaning is putting Pistol Pete at number six. I mean, man, I think he averaged the most points per game out of the remaining four guys.
Oh
Man,
yeah.
I think Clyde filled the stat sheet up the most because he averaged more rebounds and assists. But yeah, overall, 24 points a game. What was it? 4 rebounds, 5 assists. That's pissed. I'm gonna just say, in my opinion, Pistol Pete should go sixth.
Well, I
Is
brought it up, so I agree. Marty, what do you think?
is Clyde in there still
We,
with
we
that,
still have
or
Clyde, and that's why I said it's
Yeah,
tough with the Clyde and Reggie. Well, really, Clyde, Reggie, and Pistol. Reggie never won a championship. Pistol never won one. Clyde had the one that, obviously it wasn't like his team. Doesn't mean he's not a champion. Obviously he is. And that's kind of why I initially brought Dwayne in, because he had 3 titles with 2 distinct teams, the Shaquille team and then the LeBron team. But so I guess for purposes of this, yeah, we're down to Clyde, Pistol, and Reggie, if you don't want to consider Dwayne number 6.
yeah, I have no problem putting Pistol Pete, next in line. It's hard not to. It's hard to not have him in the top three, statistically.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, and I think a quick recap here: Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time, shooting guard wise. Kobe number 2, Jerry West 3, Allen Iverson 4, George Gervin 5, Pistol Pete 6 is a list that, I mean, that argue it if you want, but it's going to be tough. And please don't throw in all these new school guys, because like I said, they can't get touched. Of course, it's easier to score nowadays. They're not allowed to
Yep.
do anything to them. So, all right, and I say that too, being funny somewhat. And like last night, watching Devin Booker, and I think he's a distinct 2. He's so good, and just because he can't be touched, it doesn't detract from the skill set the kid has. Where he's great. I mean, he is great. It's just a shame that the NBA as a whole, it has that stain on it. To me, as a guy in his late 40s,
Oh.
that I just can't get over that. You got to consider the difference. It's almost like a completely different sport.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm like one of the old guys rambling on. You younger listeners hear that all the time, I'm sure. But with that being said, Pistol Pete is number 6. We need 7 and 8. We have Dwayne Wade, who from conversation might be the outsider. It's then between Reggie Miller and Clyde Drexler. Or if we want to throw some kind of wild card in there, I don't know who else you would throw in there, but unless maybe a Klay Thompson, who again I know is new school, but just when the shooting is that good, it deserves some consideration. And since Steph is a 1, I'm assuming Klay is a clear
Yeah.
2.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, yeah, and he is. But yeah, I mean whew, just I mean, he's made the all defensive team. His problem is the poor guy just can't stay healthy. Um,
Yeah. Yep.
but anyway, so let's just kind of stay with what we have right now. 7 and 8. I'm still going to keep Dwayne Wade in the mix. So Dwayne Wade, Reggie Miller, Clyde Drexler, who should be 7. Um, Mike, what is your initial thought?
I think out of the remaining, the remaining 3 guys, I believe it is D Wade, Clyde, and Reggie. I think I'm good sliding D Wade in at this point, and it's almost hard to say that because like you mentioned earlier, how we said that Clyde, if not for Michael, may have been the best player, the best 2 guard of his era, and yet he still hasn't been ranked here. So it is tough. And then obviously Reggie Miller was fantastic as well, but I think at what, 7, I think I'm fine sliding Dwayne Wade in at this point.
Well, I certainly wouldn't argue because I was trying to get him in at even potentially 5.
Okay.
But we need to come to an agreement here. I mean, and he could bump to 8. He could not make the list, but that, you know, according to, lineups, he's the 4th greatest shooting guard of all time. Um, I mean, a 13-time All-Star, 8-time All-NBA team, 3-time All-Defensive. As I said, 3 rings. He was a Finals MVP. I'm assuming that was on the Shaq squad. A lot of these other stats I can't see because of the way they have their site set up. But yeah, I mean, just tremendous. But then you're like, well, okay, what about Reggie? I know Reggie doesn't have any rings, but shooting guard? I mean, my God. Clutch. We talked about that Michael Kobe type killer Jerry West instinct. Reggie had it. I mean, who wouldn't want to have Reggie Miller on their team? I mean, a leader, just an animal on the court. You got to love Reggie. And then Clyde, like the soft spoken gentleman of the league, but just with a skill set that would embarrass you. He was so good. He was I don't know if saying the poor man's Michael Jordan is the right way to say it because it doesn't sound good, but yeah, I mean, Clyde, whew, wow, talk about a legendary Hall of Fame, top notch, just
Oh
human
yeah.
being and player. That's Clyde Drexler. So, number 7, Marty, where are you going?
Well, I'll agree with you guys on Dwayne Wade. I mean, I may have been too harsh with the super team stuff. I mean, I'm not a fan of that at all. But yeah, Dwayne Wade was absolutely, phenomenal scorer. And again, one of the caveats for me personally, I really appreciate the good defensive players, and I know Dwayne Wade was also a very good defensive player, especially in his younger days. So yeah, I agree with Dwayne Wade being in there now.
All right. So that leaves one spot open for our Elite Eight. And boy, is this going to be hard because on paper it's going to be between Reggie Miller and Clyde Drexler.
Mm,
Uh, Looking at just numbers, which is a little surprising, Clyde is a better career scorer and he's a better field goal percentage shooter. Obviously, not
yeah,
3. Clearly a dominant rebounder compared to Reggie and a dominant assist guy. A
yeah.
10-time All-Star to Reggie's 5. A 5-time All-NBA team to Reggie's 2.
Mm,
He's got 1 ring. Reggie has 0.
book it,
Numbers wise, Clyde blows him off the paper. So I'm going to go with Clyde. But
book
Marty,
it,
what do you think?
book it. I agree. Yeah, Drexler's numbers are, elite level. They are, higher. And I think I was reading here that Drexler averaged more rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks than even Kobe. So just incredible. Yeah, I agree. I think Drexler would edge out Reggie Miller.
And actually, I appreciate you saying that. So again, maybe folks are a little bit younger, and if you grew up in that generation, you think Kobe is the greatest of all time. It is hard to argue. We all have our opinions, though. But if you compare these stats, and it's Kobe was still at least partially in the solid generation of the NBA. Clyde Drexler only averages like, what is that, 4.6 points less a game. But
Yep,
Clyde has a better field goal percentage, just about even 3 points. He's a better rebounder. Yeah, as Marty said, better assists, better steals. I mean, so at least the on the court stats, Clyde is better all around. So just to put it in perspective, not taking away from Kobe, but I'm just saying, really for Clyde's benefit, if you're not as familiar with Clyde, once again, YouTube this man and see what he did. I mean,
oh yeah.
phenomenal. Just a great. When we said he was the next guy after Michael for all those years, we meant it.
Yep.
So, Mike, I'll just go to you here then. So, our Elite Eight we're saying is Michael, Kobe, Jerry West, AI. And then our second four, George the Iceman Gervin, Pistol Pete Maravich, Dwayne Wade, and Clyde Drexler. How do you feel about that?
I think that it sounds good to me. And I do agree that Clyde, edges out Reggie, and I guess that just shows you how stacked the two positions been throughout the years. That somebody that had the career that Reggie had and the clutch ball player that he was, and he still
Yeah.
didn't make the top 8. But it would be very hard to argue with or against rather putting Clyde on this list because they said Clyde could. If you put Clyde in that top 5, you may not get much of an argument. He was that good, but yeah, just because of the caliber of players throughout the years that have played that position, it just knocked him down to 8. But yeah, with all due respect to Reggie, who was amazing, I agree with what we have here with Clyde being at number 8 with the overall 1 through 8. I feel good with it.
And I think it's a fantastic list too. I think it's spot on. And again, I've got to throw this in, and I'm so sorry to the younger listeners, but I mentioned comparing Clyde's stats to Kobe. You can take, the younger audience can say, well, look at James Harden. He's averaged more points than Kobe. They're pretty much identical. In field goal percentage, he's a better 3-point shooter than Kobe. He's more rebounds than Kobe, more assists than Kobe. Why wouldn't we consider James Harden? I'm just telling you, what we grew up with, what was basketball back in the day, and any of these interviews you watch with like NBA guys will confirm. It's just not the same.
Nope.
They can't beat. It's not the same. The NBA started to move to star making, and they wanted high scoring games, so they implemented all these rules where these guys couldn't be touched. And I know I sound like the old man, but I'm just saying that's why James Harden, who statistically, you look at that, and in terms of his all around game, I don't think James wants to play defense. He would prefer that the NBA be like the NFL and he could just sit and just come in during the offensive sets. But so for that, he's not the all around player that we tried to include on this list. But I'm just throwing that in for the people that are like, my God, James Harden, why didn't you even bring him up? We did bring him up earlier, but that's where it's coming from. And I've mentioned it again. I don't know why I feel like I have to mention it a second time. I might mention it a third time before we're done here. But I think we are about done. We agree on this Elite Eight. It is a phenomenal Elite Eight. Marty, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I agree.
Nice. All right. Well, go ahead.
That-
I'm sorry.
I agree, though. I think list is spot on. I think it's always important to say anyone can have different opinions. There's nothing wrong with that, and we could go back and forth. But yeah, I think it'd be hard to top our list.
And again, that's what the comment section is for. Go ahead. Hey, old man, you're completely wrong. James Harden's the greatest of all time. Let us know.
Block, yeah, but
Yeah.
we appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what that's what this is all about. It's discussing. Everybody has different opinions. So, all right. Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Tournament Podcast, our momentous 10th podcast. First time we have touched on the NBA. The first time we've touched on a major sport. A lot of our podcasts revolved around movies, music, pro wrestling as the primary focal point of what we've discussed here, at least in the first 10 episodes. But I think it was fun to go outside the box here and touch on the NBA. Obviously, I could see this coming back as the greatest point guards, the greatest centers, etc., and I'm sure it will, or at least some variation of that. So we'll spice things up a bit and see what we do next time. But appreciate you guys listening. Again, please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Give us a like, comment, whether it's negative or positive. We appreciate it all. And thanks so much. For Marty and Mike, this is Tom. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.